let's continue with their conversation.
Like, what if, this is a question I haven't thought a lot about it, but it's been a few years I've been kicking this question around. So, I mean, what if only the actual is possible? What if there was, what if, so we live with this feeling of possibility. We live with the sense that, so, I have two daughters. I could have had a third child, right? So what does it mean to say that I could have had a third child? Or you don't have kids, I don't think.
No.
So
not that I know of.
Yes.
So the possibility might be there.
So what do we mean when we say you could have had a child, or you might have a child in the future? Like what is the space in reality? What's the relationship between possibility and actuality and reality? Is there a reality in which non-actual things are nonetheless real?
Okay, so I think he begins strongly there, but then he confuses himself. Yes, it's true from an objective God's eye view in some sense, only the actual ever happens. But for a person, for an individual person, for a subject, from the perspective of that person, or an observer if you like, only a tiny sliver of the possibilities are ever experienced. Or we might say actualized in their lives. What the laws of physics permit. But what the laws of physics permit happens somewhere. But there is a caveat here, and let me go through this, and I'll explain this at some length. Errors my own, as always. I may be stepping too far in particular areas. I'm not saying at all, as always, that David Deutsch would endorse any of this, or Chiara Marletto, or any genuine expert in constructor theory, or David Wallace, an expert in an understanding of Everettian quantum theory. So take this as a layperson interested in this particular stuff, explaining their understanding of the place of possibility and the possibility of free will in a reality governed by quantum theory. Vanilla quantum theory. I'll use my trope example. The kind of trope example that annoys everyone, but whatever, okay? It's useful, people get it. If you've got two drinks before you, and you want to have one of them, and your choice is tea and coffee, and you only choose one of them, you don't take both of them. Well, it really is the case that according to physics, quantum physics, if you like, unitary quantum mechanics just says that if the formalism says that a thing happens, then it happens. Or some call it the Everettian interpretation. They might be subtly different. Anyway, the quantum multiverse, the many worlds. According to quantum mechanics, the most vanilla version with no added assumptions about collapse or whatever. According to this theory, if you're like me, then in most of the time you choose tea. And when that choice is offered to you, tea or coffee, you go, I'd rather have tea. So on quantum mechanics, the whole of physical reality really does partition itself into what we call measures, different proportions. Say, and I'm making up these numbers, but they make the point. Because I'm generally a person who chooses tea, then when offered tea and coffee, in 90% of the universes, 90% of the multiverse, where this choice is happening, where I exist, then in 90% of physical reality, that becomes a place where I've had tea. In 9.9999999, imagine those nines go on for about 100 decimal places, percent, that's where I have coffee. Now we've got a missing amount, 0.00000, imagine 100 zeros and then 1%. That tiny, tiny fraction is where something genuinely bizarre happens. In fact, it might be more than 100 zeros, maybe 1,000, maybe 10,000. A tiny, tiny fraction. Barely worth worrying about, except that it actually happens. What is that something bizarre? Consistent with the laws of physics. Actually happens. Could possibly happen, therefore actually happen somewhere in the multiverse. Well, this is where the weird thing happens. The weird thing is you're offered tea, you're offered coffee, you take tea because you're normally a person who takes tea. 90% of the universe is like that. And almost 10%, but not quite, of the other universes you have coffee. But that missing amount, that tiny, tiny fraction, is where the weird thing happens, like the coffee, or the tea rather, one of them, turns into Coca-Cola. And you get neither tea or coffee. Or it turns into orange juice. Or it turns into a rabbit that hops away. Or I turn into a rabbit. Or something else just as bizarre happens because of the motion of particles by chance doing something exceedingly unlikely, but nevertheless possible. And the possible here is actual, as strange as that sounds.